Hello, my name's Nikki Moore and I work at the International Centre for Guidance Studies at the University of Derby, where I'm Senior Lecturer in Career Development. This presentation is an introduction to the Gatsby Benchmarks of Good Career Guidance. I am currently the project manager for the evaluation of the Gatsby Benchmarks, which is taking place in the northeast of England, and as such I'm well placed to provide information about the Gatsby Benchmarks, of which I've now got rather a lot of experience. So my talk will cover some of the background and context to the Gatsby Benchmarks. I'll touch on the evidence base for career guidance. I'll then take you through the 8 Gatsby Benchmarks and provide some concluding comments. So first of all, the background and context to the Gatsby Benchmarks. So Watson Sultana in 2004 undertook research, and their conclusions was that in all countries, career guidance is viewed as a public good. It's linked to policy goals related to learning, the labour market and social equity. And these goals are being reframed in the light of lifelong learning policies. They're linked to active labour market policies and the concept of sustained employability. And we can see the benefits of effective career guidance in the way it helps people move through the education landscape and to develop skills. We can see the benefits of effective guidance in the way people enter and exit the labour market and develop their career throughout their time as employees. And we can see the benefits through social equity in the way career guidance helps people aspire and move into professional careers, and in so doing improve social mobility. We also know that employers do struggle to find the skills they need. This isn't limited to one particular sector, but we know that sectors which utilise skills around the areas of science, technology, engineering and mathematics are particularly hard hit. And we also know that we don't tend to exploit the work-based routes as well as the academic routes into higher skilled jobs in comparison to many other countries. These vocational routes form essential pathways to develop technical and professional skills. Instead, what the UK has done over the last couple of decades is to create a greater supply of higher skills through graduates and through the higher education system. And there's been a move more recently to combine vocational routes and higher education into such opportunities as higher level apprenticeships. Research undertaken by the Sutton Trust in 2014 has also helped us understand that where career guidance is good, it has some impacts on some positive impacts on learners' outcomes. This research used having a quality award as a proxy for good career guidance, and it analysed the progression data for students in those schools and compared them to schools without quality awards. And this research found that at GCSE for 16-year-olds, where schools had got quality awards, there was an improvement in GCSE performance and a decrease in persistent unexplained absences. At A-level, at 18 years old, having a quality award and having good career guidance was associated again with a decrease in persistent unexplained absences. And for state schools and sixth form colleges, quality awards were also associated with an increase in A-level performance. There was also a change in the types of destinations that young people had. So the higher proportion of A-level students destined for top third higher education institutions was improved, and also there was a lower proportion of A-level students with NEET outcomes. So this piece of research concluded that there was a very great gain to be had by improving career guidance in these organisations. And certainly the government believes so too. So in the new career strategy, which was launched in December 2017, the government made some very bold statements about the sort of status of careers provision that they would like to see. They describe it as being world class and helping people to understand the range of opportunities available to them in order to acquire the skills they need and the qualifications they need to succeed in the workplaces of the future. I think the statement acknowledges that the workplaces of the future may well be very different to the ones we know about today, and as such people need to be able to adapt their skills and knowledge of work in order to progress into these new and as so far unexplored opportunities. Within that strategy, the government also makes very clear that schools and colleges will also be responsible for making sure that their students can access independent career guidance, and they also note that they will use the 8 benchmarks of good career guidance developed by the Gatsby Charitable Foundation to set a standard of excellence. So already we can see that the Gatsby benchmarks are fundamental to schools achieving the government's vision. Further to that, slightly earlier, and although we're still waiting for new statutory guidance, this statutory guidance in March 2015 identifies the need for schools to have a strategy for career guidance. And this strategy should be embedded within a clear framework linked to the outcomes for pupils. So they're making the connection between what goes into the programme and how that improves the outcomes for pupils. And they also make clear that through Ofsted, no school will be able to receive an outstanding grade unless there's evidence of good career guidance provision, and so they will be inspecting this as part of their inspections. So I just wanted to touch a little further on the evidence base which was gathered at the point when the Gatsby benchmarks were developed. And I think it's important to note here that the Gatsby benchmarks, whilst they're a UK and very much an English centric focus, these are based on international good practice and therefore should be able to be translated into many other contexts. So in exploring what good career guidance looked like, the research team led by the International Centre for Guidance Studies visited a number of countries. You can see them listed here: Netherlands, Germany, Hong Kong, Finland, Canada and Ireland, and they explored what good practice looked like in each of these countries. And some of the findings from those international visits were that stability is very important in providing career guidance. So in countries like Germany and Finland, the career guidance arrangements are known and understood by everybody involved. So parents and pupils know where to go, they know what happens next, and employers and other external stakeholders will know when and how to work with schools. And in every country that was visited, there was a strong emphasis on providing young people with access to employers and to people in work. However, the researchers didn't just stop at looking at international good practice, so they investigated what good practice looked like in the United Kingdom. And in order to do this, they visited independent schools, 5 in total, and they did this because generally speaking, the feeling is that independent schools do career guidance very well, and they wanted to check this out. So the schools listed here: Berkhamsted, Downhouse, Dulwich College, King Edward VI High School and Magdalen College were all visited. The results of all of this research and data gathering was condensed into 8 benchmarks of good career guidance, and I'm just going to explain what these are now. So the research suggested that there was no one thing, no one magic bullet for good career guidance. It was about doing a number of things consistently and well. And the benchmarks which sort of set out what these things are here. So the first one is a stable careers programme. Number 2, learning from career and labour market information. Number 3, addressing the needs of each pupil. Number 4, linking curriculum learning to careers. Number 5, encounters with employers and employees. Number 6, experiences of workplaces. Number 7, encounters with further and higher education. And number 8, personal guidance. And I'm going to take each one of these and explore them in a little more depth. So, benchmark number 1, a stable careers programme. The subtext here is that every school and college should have an embedded programme of career education and guidance which is known and understood by pupils, parents, teachers, governors and employers. Now, there are, in order to deliver this, a number of processes and practices which need to be in place within schools. And when you unpack this benchmark a little more, what we would want to see if we were exploring this benchmark in a school or college would be that there were very clearly identified policies and procedures in place which were communicated widely. And if I was searching for that, I'd be looking for evidence, for example, on a school website to make sure the careers policy was there. It also means that the taught programme and programme of activities should be clearly visible to everybody. And again, I would be looking for that on websites and on intranets, for example. But I would also need to know that the processes which allowed management to be effective were in place, and so I would be looking for very strong processes of monitoring, review and evaluation, which should include using the young person's voice in order to improve the programme. And I would expect to see an MRE programme in place which was planned and didn't exist entirely of happy sheets. It should include a whole range of other types of evaluation activity, including discovering what people's learning is from a programme, i.e. assessment, looking at how behaviour changes, so analysing performance data and progression data, and also looking at the results for the organisation. And so I would be looking at whether schools are managing such things as employer and stakeholder engagement effectively, and that there were processes, practices and individuals in place to do that. Of course, none of this can happen unless effective leadership is in place, and therefore I would be looking to see that there was a consistent feedback loop between teachers, between middle leaders, senior leaders and the governing body, and that these people should all be fully aware, conversant and involved in the process of feedback, and that these people all had adequate training to undertake the jobs that they're involved in. The actual delivery of a careers programme, a taught programme, isn't explicit as a benchmark in its own right, and therefore when I'm exploring a stable careers programme, I'm looking for evidence that a taught programme is in place, which really includes the following learning domains set out by Law and Watts in 1977. So some of you may be aware of the DOTS acronym. This stands for decision making, opportunity awareness, transitional awareness and self-awareness. And we would expect a programme, a taught programme and a programme of activities to provide opportunities for young people to learn in all of those learning domains. Benchmark 2 then, learning from career and labour market information. So this is very clearly stated here that every pupil and their parents should have access to good quality information about future study options and labour market opportunities. But it also notes that they will need the support of an informed advisor to make best use of the available information. So already we can see that it's simply not good enough to provide access to websites young people need help to interpret and personalise that information. Within this benchmark is included a whole range of particular issues around the provision of labour market information. So, for example, we would need to be clear if exploring this within a school that young people are introduced early enough within their time in school to know where information can be found, but that they also need digital literacy in order to understand, interpret, personalise, save, collate and change information so that they can make the best use of this. Now, this will be taught in a number of places, so some of that will be covered in career lessons, and I'd be looking for examples of lesson plans to show me, but it will also be covered in ICT and programmes of personal development or tutorial programmes. So it's often quite difficult to pin this down, but there certainly needs to be some way of helping young people understand how to use the internet for search. It also includes the need for young people to learn how to present themselves through social media in an effective and proper way so they don't hinder their opportunities for gaining meaningful programmes of learning and employment, and so there needs to be something within the programme which addresses this. There are also some issues here about how schools engage with alumni in order to provide information to their students. And I know that in many schools that I visit, alumni are used, but this isn't consistent across all subjects, for example. And therefore, I would want to make sure that schools were utilising alumni in an efficient way, that this process was managed, and that opportunities were not missed across curriculum subjects to engage with alumni. Finally, I'd want to make sure that schools had got processes in place for making sure that the information that they were providing to young people was quality information, and therefore the teachers and advisors need to be fully versant on how to manage and evaluate career and labour market information so that they are sure that the young people are getting the best information possible. Benchmark number 3, addressing the needs of each pupil. This benchmark acknowledges that all young people have different career guidance needs, and these are prevalent at different stages of their learning. And the opportunities for advice and support need to be tailored for each pupil. This goes beyond thinking about young people with special educational needs. It's really very holistic and acknowledges that every young person has different needs. And so, for example, when I'm looking at this benchmark in schools, I would be trying to find out how young people who maybe are considered gifted and talented receive personalised support, how young people receive support to address stereotypical decision making, be that gender or cultural decision making. I would want to be sure that schools were having processes in place to monitor the individual career guidance needs of pupils as well. And in fact, this is probably one of the trickiest things to do. Not quite so difficult in a small school, but in a large school or college, how that organisation manages the tracking of individuals through the career guidance process is a difficult one to achieve. A number of organisations have started to use commercial products such as Unifrog or other commercially available products to help them with that process, and I would certainly be looking for evidence of how this was being done. And of course, having said that this isn't just about pupils with SEND, very much they are profiled within this benchmark, and I would want to make sure that the processes were in place to ensure that conversations took place with career guidance professionals and SENCOs within schools to make sure that no opportunity was missed to ensure that career guidance support was streamlined and tailored to other processes within the organisation. Okay, benchmark number 4, linking curriculum learning to careers. Well, in fact, as I started working around the benchmarks, this seemed to be, in the early days, one of the most tricky things to manage. And this is difficult because this benchmark requires all teachers to link curriculum learning with careers. Not just some, but all. So if a school is to achieve this benchmark, every teacher in the school should be able to talk about how they are linking their subject to careers. They do highlight STEM, although I think it's important to note that other curriculum subjects are as important, and not everybody wants a STEM career, but the arts and humanities subjects still need to make the links as well. In practice, this is done in many different ways. So it can be through subject and option choices, where teachers are helping young people understand the relevance of certain subjects in their decision making. But increasingly, what I'm seeing are more opportunities for employers, for example, to come into schools and deliver parts of the curriculum themselves, and this really helps young people see the meaning and relevance of subjects to their future careers. The difficulty here is that whilst there's excellent practice often in some subjects, this can rely on individual teachers' links to different companies. And where a school is doing this well, these processes need to be managed to make sure that every single subject has links into employers so they can come in and talk to the students. So if a school is only doing that in some places and not all, then unfortunately they've still got a way to develop their provision to meet this benchmark. Now, there are two benchmarks which talk about employers. Number 5 is really around how schools engage with employers and allow employers to work with students in a variety of different ways. And this is really important to help young people learn from employers about work, about employment, and about the skills and attitudes that are valued in the workplace. There can be an awful lot of enrichment activities that schools provide. What I've seen is a massive increase in the number of activities that are taking place through visiting speakers, mentoring, enterprise schemes, and things like CV workshops, mock interviews, all of those types of things. So again, lots of good practice taking place, but I think if a school is going to meet this benchmark fully, it's not good enough to just have these activities taking place. There needs to be processes in place for monitoring, reviewing and evaluating these activities to make sure they are appropriate, that they are having impact, and that students are actually learning from these activities and they're at the best use of their time. So benchmark 6 is around experiences of the workplaces, and actually I think this is where students need to be leaving the school and going out to see workplaces. However, this can be very difficult in some schools for a number of reasons. So in the Gatsby Benchmark pilot, for example, a number of schools are in very rural and isolated areas. And of course, this makes it very, very difficult to provide experiences of a very broad range of employers. Also colleges and universities. The rurality and isolation of some schools makes this difficult. And also because of the cost of transporting young people. So some schools have started to explore alternatives and sometimes have used at universities to provide work relevant experience. So young people might have gone in and looked at criminology labs or what have you with a view to understanding the sector as well as the learning opportunities. And I think this is a difficult judgment to make in terms of whether you would actually agree that that's an experience of a workplace. Personally, I think that would count where there are no other options and that schools are being innovative and doing their best. And of course, as we're going forward, I'm already hearing about opportunities to use virtual and augmented reality applications to provide young people with experiences of workplaces. And I think this is a watch this space kind of activity, because as this grows, I think we may need to relook at this benchmark and try and understand how these types of applications do fit in to providing experiences of workplaces. But at the moment, young people should be given opportunities to go into workplaces. The new strategy is actually increasing the number of opportunities, I think to 6, that young people should have before the age of 18. And certainly schools will need to be mindful of the new strategy, and certainly the new guidance when it arrives, which I'm sure will clarify those requirements even more. Of course, again, this benchmark requires good monitoring, review and evaluation processes to be in place, and it also requires opportunities for employers to learn about the students they'll be working with, and to understand the requirements of the school as well. So I'd be looking for evidence of very strong communication protocols in place, fact sheets, etc., to help employers provide the best opportunities for the young people. So number 7, encounters with further and higher education. I think this really requires young people to learn the full range of learning opportunities. This includes vocational routes and also apprenticeship routes. So apprenticeships is one of those funny things which actually you'll see throughout the benchmark. So it would appear in the labour market benchmark. Young people should have information about those. They should, when visiting employers' premises, also have an opportunity to possibly talk to apprentices. And certainly within this benchmark, we would expect colleges and higher education providers to talk about apprenticeships, higher level apprenticeships and what have you, as well as academic routes. In the same way that experiences of workplaces, I've spoken about those, I think this benchmark as well requires good monitoring, review and evaluation processes in place. The organisations do need to ensure that young people, all young people, have had access to the full range of learning opportunities. That's very tricky. And what I have seen are that there are often some very targeted processes. So for gifted and talented pupils, for example, they will be given opportunities to visit certain types of universities. And I think I would be having conversations with schools to make sure that whilst that might be perfectly acceptable, targeted practice which addresses equality issues, there are also some issues here about all young people having access to information and experiences about these providers. Finally, personal guidance then. This talks about every young person, every pupil having opportunities to have guidance interviews with a careers advisor. They do make note that these people could be internal, a member of school staff, or external, but that they need to be trained to an appropriate level. Now, what I am seeing is more and more schools employing careers advisors, and more schools thinking about supporting these staff to gain the appropriate qualifications. If you've got any questions about what is an appropriate qualification for somebody providing career guidance, then you would need to visit the Career Development Institute's website, who provide quite a lot of information about the different levels of career guidance qualification. But I think what I would be looking for would be those providing professional, in-depth career guidance to be a minimum of level 6 qualified, and certainly to be on the register of career guidance practitioners, which is held by the Career Development Institute, and that's a quality assurance mechanism which ensures that advisors are up to date, that they maintain their knowledge and skills through continuing professional development, etc. And so in terms of a quality mechanism, that's what I would be looking for. Now, this benchmark does make it clear that this guidance should be available when decisions are being made, and that these interventions should be timed so that pupils can have their individual needs met. Again, this is a very difficult thing to manage, particularly in large schools, but requires good management information, good monitoring processes, so that everybody can be clear about who's had what, and whether that might be drop-in sessions in libraries or one-to-one sessions that last for an hour or what have you, that this is monitored so that people can provide evidence of what the students in that school have actually had or received. I would also suggest that where career guidance is being delivered by teachers and other members of staff, quite rightly, everybody has a role to play here, that there is a process of quality assurance, so through learning walks or observations, that there's some process in place to make sure that people are giving the right information in the best way to students. So that does conclude my tour through the benchmarks, but that doesn't conclude my messages, because in fact during the investigation around good career guidance, when the benchmarks were actually brought together, part of the research involved some work by Waterhouse Cooper, who investigated the cost of delivering career guidance, and certainly the evaluation of the Gatsby benchmark pilot is looking at this in real time. But Waterhouse Cooper did investigate the cost, and they noted that if one more pupil is prevented from becoming NEET, this avoids a cost to the Exchequer of enough to provide good career guidance to the level of all 8 benchmarks for 280 pupils. So it's really quite important that this is done well, so that we can provide the best opportunities in line with the government's new strategy to the maximum number of youngsters. So the benchmark frameworks, just to conclude, who are these for? Well, obviously for people who are investigating career guidance, but for many others. So career leaders, curriculum leaders, teachers and tutors, subject teachers, careers advisors and enterprise people, employers, etc. So this framework is to be widely used by all stakeholders, and certainly the evidence that is emerging from the North East is that these benchmarks are valued by all stakeholders. So employers are now really understanding how they can contribute to schools' career guidance programmes, but also how they will benefit themselves from contributing. And so this really ties into one of the original findings from the Gatsby research, that everybody should understand their contribution, and the framework of benchmarks is really helping with that. The framework has been developed to support the planning, delivery and evaluation of careers, and I think it's important to note that there are online tools which the Careers and Enterprise Company have developed to help schools to assess their current status in terms of the benchmarks. So this is the Compass tool. There is a link here that you can use to go to the Compass tool, and schools are beginning to use this, and this is the data from that has been used by the Careers and Enterprise Company to produce the State of the Nation report, which was published in autumn 2017, and that might be something that you would like to find out and read through, because it will provide a lot more information about what's happening generally in schools across the country. Also to note that the qualification in careers standard has now been mapped to Gatsby, and the quality awards that are being provided by franchised companies around the country are also now being used to help schools determine where they are with the Gatsby benchmarks, and to put plans in place to work towards the benchmarks. And once these awards have been achieved, are an external validation of whether a school has or has not met the benchmarks. So my final word then, the Gatsby report, the original report published in 2014, concludes that whilst we can all be concerned about the state of career guidance in schools. In the end, it's for head teachers and principals to take the lead by prioritising career guidance more highly. We can set out the rationale for doing this, but in the end, head teachers, governing bodies have got the decisions to make. But by reaching these benchmarks, they'll put in place a system that measures up to the best that is available around the world, and will benefit pupils not just during their education but for the rest of their lives. And I think, to add to that, in so doing will improve the status of the school within the communities that they find themselves in, will strengthen the relationships that schools have with all external stakeholders. And so I think it's a win-win for everybody. The Gatsby benchmarks are a measure of quality which everybody can sign up to, and which benefit the maximum number of people. If you have any further questions about the Gatsby pilot, you can reach me at the International Centre for Guidance Studies, either telephone or use my email address. My email address is n.moore@derby.ac.uk, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you found the presentation useful.